This is Rachel Dworkin from the Chemung County Historical Society. Today is August 27th, 2020. I am here interviewing for the COVID Memory Project, and I am speaking with...
Anthony Gill, Assistant Superintendent, Horseheads Central School District.
Okay, um, so schools were shut down in March. Can you tell us a little bit about the process on your end that went into doing the shutdown?
Sure. As we all know, there was not a lot of information on what was happening, how it was happening. We had started to, on our end in March, think about large group activities and what are we going to do with our spring sports starting up, what we're going to do with some of our activities after school, large group items. We just started to, it's odd to put yourself back in that time frame and try to remember your thought process. You know, what was the spirit of the time? And I remember spending long days looking at all the activities in our calendars for the district and deciding what can run and what couldn't run based on the information we knew in March about this. And we had spent 3 or 4 days that week of the 13th, 14th, somewhere in there of March. And at 4 p.m. on a Friday, we get a call from the county executive and the Department of Health basically saying, I think you're just going to have to close. We just got off a state call, something to that effect. And it was like, oh my God, we just spent the last 40 hours and 2 days, just cramming and trying to figure out how to move forward, all for naught. We know now we're just closed. And you know what? There was almost a relief to it. It's finally, okay, we're getting some guidance from the people in the know. Otherwise you have at least the 3 school districts, depending upon, that are solely in Chemung County, or the 5, 6, 7, but we act as a region across several counties, 21 school districts in GST BOCES, all just trying to figure out their own things. And finally to have one central person saying, this is what you're going to have to do, was like a relief. The experts are telling us how to move forward. And I think that's been an important piece of the communications since, is being able to reach out to county health department, state health department, to say, are we doing this right? Because we are not experts in health and safety when it comes to this pandemic. We need the experts to tell us if we're doing it right. We're educational experts. So that was a nuance that we'd always had. I mean, schools have always had a lot of regulation when it comes to safety, right? But our bread and butter was instructional delivery. So to shift our mindsets, and we have an expression in our that we've been using in this district for a couple of years, Maslow before it blooms. It talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and making sure people feel safe before they can learn, right? Which is Bloom's taxonomy, the learning part of what we do. And we've been using that as a district to make sure kids are ready in the right mindset, they're fed, etc. Took a whole new meeting. This we really had to understand this pandemic and the science, and the information was changing by the minute. I shouldn't say that, but in retrospective history, yeah, by the minute it seemed like it was changing. At first we were working about ventilation, and then we were working at hard surfaces. So that relief that came, that phone call, March 14th, I think it was, a Friday, don't quote me, but yeah, that was like, okay, now what? Now we have to shift, and we have to flip an educational system on its head. And the governor was giving guidance as well, or executive order at the time. He had first said it's up to school districts to decide what we want to do, and then all of a sudden he said, never mind, you guys are all closed, after our county health department was already on that. So like I said, that communication with our county health department, county executive, was key at those beginning stages. And then knowing that we didn't have to come back into these buildings or bring students into these buildings, now it was like, what's our infrastructure? How do we do our jobs? It was a paradigm shift, not to the fullest extent, but definitely a rethinking of how we deliver and do our business, which, delivering education and student learning. It went pretty fast and furious at that point. So that's how we came to that shutdown.
Okay, so once you were shut down, like, what kind of guidance were you providing your teachers? What kind of guidance were you being provided? How did it go? Like, do you think you were successful at providing education?
I'm going to be biased. I think our administrators and our teachers and our staff, they said, okay, we got to do this. I mean, they have that connection to those kids. They're not going to leave them hanging. They're going to figure out how to make it happen. That's why they're in education. That's their passion, right? That's why we do this, is to help kids. So it's not like we're saying, oh, March, sorry, we're done. Can't do anything about it. See you in September, maybe. No, I think So on the administrative side, my team started to say, how do we flip classrooms? How do we go to a remote learning? We had to really quick do some training and learning ourselves. Now, remote learning has been around for decades, or distance learning for a long time. People used to get VCR tapes to be able to play to do distance learning. So this is not a new idea. But for a system that counts on interaction of face-to-face and proximity, it's a shift in the mindset. So we knew that the first thing we had to do as a district is provide some learning to staff and to teachers on what does it mean to teach remotely. And then after establishing that, we provided professional learning on Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams, two platforms to do this work before everybody went out and found their own thing, right? We wanted to support those were two platforms we had in-house that we got everybody up and trained on during going into March and early April. So I can't remember timelines, but I think it was during that what was supposed to be an April break. The governor said, sorry, you guys, there's no April break anymore. You guys are open. You have to stay open. So our teachers did a lot of professional learning, umpteen hours of learning how to use those platforms, understand online and remote learning, and we went into action shortly in early April. So within 3 weeks' time, our system flipped on its head, and I'm pretty proud of that. I say that because I know a lot of other districts didn't have the infrastructure, the access to technology and hardware. We delivered out 900 laptops to students around the community. We put Wi-Fi on buses and delivered it out to locations throughout the Horseheads district. You know, we had an infrastructure, and knock on wood, the ability to do a little bit more and didn't have to rely on here's your packet for the week. You know, we went technology. We pushed our staff, and they stepped up to say, okay, we're going to use Zoom. We're going to do morning meetings. We're going to, when we can't connect with a kid, we're going to send them a USB drive of all the material they need to do what we're asking them to do. It was it put us in a great position to open this school year. The mindset was there. It was established. People that started to explore, get comfortable at the end of last school year, move instruction forward, student learning forward, and it really led us to a point where I think coming into this school year, we were ahead of the curve on other districts who might have said, here's your week's packet for April, whatever, and May, whatever, do this packet and return it back. We didn't do that. We said, no, get online, here's your computer, here's access, here's your USB drive, do this work, submit it back. And so it was definitely a challenge, but we were poised and we had the right resources and the right mentality to do it. So a little pride there.
I know some school districts decided not to grade following the shutdown.
Yeah.
Was that your policy as well?
At first, we did have this kind of like grace period because of a paradigm shift. We had to think. We didn't know what accessibility looked like in households. We were still trying to figure that out. How many kids were using a hotspot off a phone and didn't have broadband? I'm not going to jam up a kid because they don't have access. Simple as that. We're not going to. We're still not going to do that. We're going to work with that family to get what they need. So we definitely did a grace period, and then we said D-Days here for, I think it was, forgive me now, I'm reaching back, I think it was 7 through 12 at least, to say, okay, we're back on and we're grading. However, we did dictate from district level to say 2-week due date period. You're not going to start taking points off if someone turns in something late.
Okay.
That's so. Our pre-K through, I think it was 6. Again, I'd have to look back. I can get fuzzy. Mine's been so set on looking at September, and I'm going retro now. We did have a different system at the elementary, non-credit bearing courses that aren't required for graduation. I mean, it's just, so we did, but feedback was required. There had to be teacher feedback given to students on the work they were given and on the report cards. So we went more to the narrative when it came to our elementary levels. While at our secondary levels, no, we're kicking it in now. We're pushing out grades, and at our highest level classes, those at ACE, the Corning Community College connections or AP connections, those I don't think they ever stopped. They maintained because we're answering to a different outside group on those, and we had to follow what CCC was putting into place or what the expectation of the outside group institution was that awards the credit. So, and our teachers stepped up to meet those needs as well.
There weren't regents though, right?
There were not regents, and there were not regents in August either. And right now, New York State is saying we're going to sort of plan on them for January, but we'll see what January and June looks like. Was their last memo last week. So we got dates for them, but they're saying they're just keep an eye on things, whether it's practical or not. Same with the 3 through 8 testing that was in the spring did not happen either.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about graduation.
That was interesting. There was a lot of, I'll say this because it's true, and I used to say it as a principal, graduation is often for the parents. Mm. Graduation is a prideful moment as a parent to watch your kid walk across the stage. Kids often just, they're around their friends, they can celebrate together, and they might pay attention when another fellow classmate's speaking, but the pomp and circumstance of it is very much for an audience of the parent and the pride that to see their kid accomplish that task. So as a district, we had to try to meet those that wanted in person and those that didn't want to come anywhere near the building. So we, Dr. Douglas and working with the Board of Education and community and our senior class advisors, and our Chris Earl, our principal at the high school, did an amazing job meeting both ends. So if you want it in person, tell us who you are, your name, and we'll make it happen. And we did. We had 2 graduation ceremonies, socially distanced on our football field. We also did a drive-through graduation that was, very one student at a time, coming onto the stage, seeing the principal, getting the diploma, walking off, getting their picture taken, pomp and circumstance playing, and parents able to get out of their car, watch it, set this whole routine. So many families, and then as they drove out, many of our faculty and staff were lined up on the road to wave and cheer them on. So the spirit was there. A lot of people were very pleased with that, and but we still had those that wanted that in person. So I think we might have had about 70 seniors, which equates to less than a third of the graduating class wanted to do the in-person.
So I noticed that there were signs around town that proud Horseheads High School senior.
Yeah.
Was that you guys?
That was our high school.
Okay.
Put that together. I don't know how it all came to fruition, but Chris Earl, like I said, she was constantly thinking, how do we make sure these kids know they don't miss out, that we do something special for them. We had some community partners with that too that offered to give us things to hand out to kids. I'm trying to remember who they were. I'm pretty sure that the Chemung County Youth Bureau was involved with assisting Bob Harris with some of that work. So definitely trying to acknowledge kids and this uniqueness and the feeling from them. Some of them, they were robbed of a lot of important events. Mm. And prom. I mean, parents wanted graduation. The kids were holding off for a prom. I mean, that's a capstone event in a high school career for them socially, and not to have that. And how do we do all these things differently? How do we try to? So Chris and her team and our counselors did a great job there.
Okay. So I want to shift gears a little bit. You kept talking about looking forward to September. Let's look forward to September.
Yeah.
When did the planning for September start, and how did that process work?
Sure. It was rocky. And I say that because we were waiting on guidance. We were told to follow a reopening plan. That would be a detailed document to which we would have to ensure that we were following. We were told we'd come in June. I don't believe we received it until July 15th. So we did a lot of conversations and what ifs, but that's frustrating because you don't know what you're allowed to do and what we didn't have the regs. On the week of July 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere in there, I think it was the 12th, we received the Department of Health's musts. We call them the musts. You must do this, you must do this, you must do this. And it was several pages of musts. And then we received the Friday, Thursday or Friday, I can't remember, I think it was Thursday, the 100 and something page document from New York State Education Department telling us this is what you must do, and they broke it down into 13 different categories and each subcategories, and so now we're kicking into action. So one thing we've done very well as a district is engage stakeholder groups. Mm-hmm. We knew that we could just behind a closed door take these 2 documents and do whatever we wanted, right? because we have to. It's the must. It's not like it's negotiable. We have to do these things. But I think often how we do them can be discussed and talked about. Everybody needs to understand what the end goal is. So we had a project several years ago, Horseheads 2030, envisioning what our district would look like bricks and mortar and educationally when our pre-K class graduated in 2030. Hence the capital project we have going on now, and a lot of our curriculum work and instructional work that we have happening were all started with a reimagining of that pre-K class.
Bet you didn't reimagine this.
This was not factored into it, but you know what? It gave birth to a lot of things, technology, mindset of curriculum, and social emotional well-being that moving to what we have to do now, we had a foundation. So it was like, remember how we've been talking about the invisible backpack and social emotional learning of staff and students? Well, guess what? We're really going to apply it now. Remember the curriculum work we were doing for the last 2.5 years because of that, that work, and figuring out what's the essential learning and how do we develop lessons and units internally without using textbooks and vendor-based programs to create a Horseheads true curriculum? Let's do that now. Let's create our online platform using those same essentials. So it did poise us, and then it also allowed us to say to our stakeholders who were involved in that process, for me to reach back out to some of the community members that volunteered their time through that lengthy process to say, hey, you want to come back? I mean, that's how Bruce was we had interacted during that process, and then I invited him back for this reopening. So we put together a bunch of stakeholder groups.
So who were these stakeholder groups?
Good. So we had 5 teams. We took the guidance document from New York State and realized there was 5 main silos. They all interlocked, but 5 main silos. There was the health and safety. So I'm going to give you the overview, then I can tell the membership makes sense from there. So you had your health and safety, who had dozens of pages, of course, from Department of Health in New York State. You had the food service, which was very specific on how food needs to be delivered either to the home remotely or in-house, and the specified musts. We had our transportation, which had its own rules that also came from the Department of Transportation, New York State Department of Transportation, and other organizations that they have to abide by. And then we had our instructional lens, which went anywhere from how are we going to take attendance in this whole brand new world if the kids aren't here, to how are we going to grade, how are we going to deliver specials and special ed and differentiate, and our instructional lens. And then we had a social emotional committee. We felt so strongly because of the initiative and how important that work was that we have to acclimate our employees, our parents, back into this reality. As administrators, we came back in June finally in person, and we had time to adjust and figure this new reality out. There's people that haven't been in this building since March. And kids that haven't been in large groups or out of their house in some rare outlier instances. So very important to make sure that their experience and we all remember how it was to come back to work. And so to work with them, and so this whole group of groups, now because of those specific topics dictated often the membership of it, right? So I'm not going to put a facilities or a grounds person on this necessarily on the safety, on the social emotional, right? We did have transportation people there because often the first person a kid has interaction from is the bus driver, right? So social emotional did transcend to food service as well as transportation, but social workers, social work assistants, school psychologists, special ed representation because of the related services, and then administrators, teachers, community members. And then when we looked at the food service, obviously I'm going to have facilities represented, but I'm also going to have the food service staff, which was primary parent representation or community representation, and administrative. Both building and central office and all of these. So the common theme is going to be employee or a very specific type of employee given the nature of it. Often a teacher there was a teacher represented, at least several teachers in each of those units, but they were more heavily in the instructional group, right? Which also included communities in every single one of them as well. Central office and building administrators in every single one. It just got a little bit more specific on the food service. Your transportation had your dispatchers and your mechanics and the drivers, as well as the building level parents, etc., administrators. So we counted and worked with I worked with our PTOs to get representation. These are people that volunteer their time to assist our students and to work with our staff and our principals to better a building. So I reached out to them and said, would any of you like to be engaged in this process? And then when I looked at our 2030 group and those people that gave their time there, would you like to be engaged in this process? So that's how we grabbed from the community, and then we will talk to the different units, the teachers unit and the administrators unit and our teaching assistant unit, to make sure we had the representation on the variety of committees. So definitely that's how it's stakeholdered out. So that's all. You talk what we did to prepare for September. We knew that was going to be sort of the structure that we would look to once we got the guidance. So as soon as we got the guidance, I set up the teams, put the invites out, asked for volunteers, and by that end of mid next week after that, June 15th, by the 18th, 19th, 20th, somewhere in there, we had 5 huge committees running district-wide, most of them met 3 times over the course of 2 weeks, to say, can we do this? What does this look like? Can we open? And if we do, how do we open? Given this guidance, given our resources, given the realities, what does the community feel good about? What do the parents feel good about? We also had surveys that went out to gauge the community and their feelings about not only the learning that happened. We had a smaller response rate for that. About 400 to 500 people responded about the instructional side of it. Do you prefer Google Classroom? Do you prefer Microsoft Teams? Do you have internet access? Then the other side of it, we had a large response when we asked, if we were to come back, would you want to come back in a blended or a hybrid model? Would you want to not come back at all and be 100% remote? Would you like to come back full time? So we had a survey that went out with a couple thousand, 1,500 responses, kind of giving us some guidance for those teams to work from and to make final decisions.
And what were those final decisions?
Good question. We came back. So each team had a facilitator, and I kind of went in between all 5 teams. We sat back at the table after the last team met, and I had a simple question to all the facilitators: what can we do? Can we do this? And what model? The governor gave us 3 choices: 100% open, everybody here every day; 100% closed, no one here, 100% all remote; or a hybrid, a little bit of each. It was deemed that, given the health department regulations of social distancing and masking, as well as our transportation's inability to get students in these buildings, and we have a very large bus fleet, and we do 100% busing, and even given those that chose to not bus their children and said they would transport, we still could not be 100% capacity. So we split our kids in half, an A-B model. Kids that are of higher need come more often, but in general, you're either coming Monday or Tuesday, or Thursday and Friday. And
what's
then the other
happening
days are
Wednesday?
remote. Wednesday is still education continues every single day. That's the expectation from the state. It's a must that everybody saw. A regular substantive interaction. Everybody says, what the heck does that mean, Tony? And it means you just need to make sure that you're in contact with kids on a daily basis. There is no down day. There is constant moving forward of our educational platform and learning essentials on a daily basis. It's not like it's not a day off. The intent, of course, is always on that Wednesday also to hit related services, kids that have special ed needs, to make sure that we're addressing what they need to have serviced as far as their individual educational plans or IEPs, and also make sure that we're closely connecting to those families and kids that chose 100% remote. Because, to be honest with you, that's always your concern, because your interaction is limited. You don't see the kid. So we needed to make sure that we had a day for those teachers that have the 100% remote, that they truly can now not have to, they're supervising kids in front of them, but not on Wednesdays. Now there's an intentionality of the expectation of reach out to those 100% remote kids, make sure that they're staying connected, individual conversations, whatever's required to keep that daily interaction moving forward. So Wednesdays is not a down day. It's kind of continual interaction with students is the expectation.
Okay. So what's happening with sports, extracurriculars? What are you doing? Are you having them? How's that going to work?
Again, all dictated by New York State. Governor's released just very recently some information about what he thinks can happen, but of course leaves it up to the individualized district right now to make determinations. I can tell you when it comes to extracurriculars, non-athletic, it's we're looking at it and saying what needs to run. You still need class advisors. I think you still need yearbook, right? There's some key extracurriculars that continue because it's part of the culture and climate of your buildings. It's just needed things. There are others that can't run given the nature of the environment, and we're just going to have to go through those and
like
say
band and choir.
So we're not going to right now with the guidance.
broadcasting.
Well, so let's make the separation though, and I think that's an important point. Music education is a requirement. It is part of our daily schedule. The extra that's connected to it, however, is your concert, right?
Right.
Or your marching band. But a lot of it happens during the school day.
Right.
So there's this co-curricular nature to some of our performance areas. So music particularly, you're right. They're talking about rethinking how you do your job. The regulation now currently reads 12 feet. You have to be 12 feet between people to play an instrument. And so if you have a band of 150 and you have a band room in any given year, that's not a problem. But when you can only have 12 feet radius, and you're talking about 10 kids in that room now. So how do we rethink?
Football field.
Right. You put them outside of the wood, right? What does that, but how do you, the logistics of how do you schedule that? You still have 150 kids coming fifth period. What do you do? We have conversations coming with all our departments, especially our performance-based areas like PE, music, technology, because we don't want kids using bandsaws at home. So, right, and we're not going to give them here's a table saw, take it home to work with. No, so we have to rethink these performance-based pieces of our jobs. I'm trying to think of the other ones were science, especially in the 712 in our labs.
What about home ec? Do you still do home ec?
So family and consumer sciences. We have that meeting coming up as well next week to say, how do you re-envision what they're going to be doing? How can they cook remotely, or how can they do the sewing requirements? And there's so many other aspects that aren't hands-on to family consumer sciences, but those are the ones that the community remembers. The sewing project you did, and the stuffed animal you did, or your masks, right? Or what you cooked and how you cooked. There's specific regulatory from the Department of Health and Education on what we have to do there. But still, if I'm 100% remote, what am I doing? These are questions, but I'm feeling pretty good. We got some smart people. They're talking amongst themselves. They're talking with other districts. They're talking with their regional or groups like band music education has the New York State NISBA, music and education. I forget. Don't quote me. NISBA. That's why we just refer to the acronyms and pretend we know what they mean or stand for. There's all these organizations out there that are talking and saying, here's some best practices. Try this, try this, try this. And that's all, we're going to count on the professional. I'm not an expert in music. I love music, and I'm not an expert in physical education. I got teachers that are, though, and they're going to figure it out because they will. That's what they do.
Do you feel that you as a district are ready to open? In September, you're good to go?
I think we have a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. We have a lot of things we still got to iron out. There are just those small little protocols. Toughest part, I think, sometimes is we often say that, don't you remember the email I sent you? It told you how to do that. How many freaking emails do we get anymore in a remote setting? Hundreds a day come in. Probably in the last, since I've been sitting here, 19 have come in. So this notion of communication has also been challenging, but also and I say this global in a lot of different circumstances, what we're going through now. All the things that we're doing now and paying attention to now is only going to make the profession better. The integration of technology at the level we're doing right now, while it might not be sustainable and go into 5 years from now, there are people that are going to continue using these tools because they're just good practice, and it really does prepare students for what it might look like when they go to beyond these walls. There really are the cliche 21st century 21st century learning skills, right? We're 20 years into that, so we should probably stop using that expression. But there are definitely these skill sets that are transcend our building and go out to the workforce. So I think everything we're doing technology is going to benefit our kids that way, and our teachers are going to continue with it because they're going to find the tools valuable. Same logic with communication. The ways we re-envision how we have to communicate with people when we can't sit face to face. How do we do that differently? And I think those are going to find some best practices that will continue after all this is over. So I'm a historical guy. I see crises happens, communities, societies respond to them, and then a consumeristic cultural boom happens afterwards in response. You see it after a war. You see it after a pandemic. You see it throughout history after these abrupt changes to the patterns of society, and people can respond to it. Those things then end up becoming, making the society different and greater in the end. So being the optimistic I am and seeing that historical pattern, I'm saying, okay, I see it. I see that people are going to use Zoom. People are going to use Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom. They're going to communicate differently on social media. They're going to use different ways to communicate with the public and each other that are more efficient and effective than before. And it's just assuming. I sent you the email. You know the protocol for letting somebody into the building. Didn't you read my email? Well, I don't think that's going to cut it anymore. I think we've got to be more intentional and aware of how we're communicating. And we make a lot of some. I read it on social media. How often do we hear that? It's got to be right. I think this is a challenge to that, to say, okay, just because you put it out there doesn't mean it's understood. So communication, when I think about opening for the school year, is I think the one barrier, not barrier, it's a speed bump. It's how do we effectively communicate to, for me, 625 employees and 4,200 students and umpteen amount of families to make sure that they feel good and their questions are answered. And just having Q&A sessions, and I don't know what that looks like because we can't give every one of those people the amount of time to go through all their questions. The best we can do is get their questions and respond to them and try to provide them information and understanding. So that's been the most challenging thing, communication.
Okay.
And I think what makes that worse is that our requirements, our directives from those that can tell us to open or close, Department of Health, New York State Education, the governor, change. And so just as soon as we think we've finally communicated the message, we get a curveball. Like we're saying, we're probably not going to have to be able to do sports this year. And then the governor announces, hey, if you want to do sports come September, go ahead. I'm like, what the heck? I joke, there's no easy decisions in this business anymore. I have administrators and staff working 16-hour days, and for every one decision they make, it has a ripple that they didn't think about because of the time crunch, starting back to that July 15th. And July 31st is when we submitted our plan. So it's just every time we think we made the right decision, something changes. Someone about, as they can, tell us what to do differently, and we're like, crap, now we got to revisit that. I just need an easy button on something right now. Give me an easy button.
So speaking of things that won't be easy, what is your contingency plan for when a student inevitably tests positive?
Sure, and you know what? A lot of people ask that, and it's the right question. As a parent myself, that's a question I wonder about. And we have a Department of Health has outlined a very clear protocol for us to follow. We are not health experts. Again, we're educational experts. We have a nurse in our building to assist, and they are in close connection to understand that protocol. And contact tracing is detailed in a lot of different documents by the state and a variety of different departments. We just follow that. That's we can't make any judgment on those things or alterations to that. We follow what they tell us to do, which is we have to create these separate rooms to which students, if they test in the moment, there's two questions here. If they show multiple symptoms, right now the guidance says that, it could change. If they have multiple symptoms or if they come in with a fever, they're put in a separate isolation room until the child's picked up. If a child is in school and going about and we are following what we're supposed to do, masking and socially distancing and hand washing on a regular basis, we're meeting the requirements of the Department of Health. And if a child or a member of a does happen to test positive, the Department of Health steps in and does the contact tracing. We don't do that. That's not our job. They will tell us, did you do this? Who doesn't do this? What did you do? They'll ask the questions. We'll follow their lead. Again, they're the health experts, not us.
So the health department will be making decisions about whether or not a school needs to shut down, or do you have some minimum threshold, like, hey, if a quarter of the students and staff test positive, we're done?
No, there's nothing like that. There's I think it's right now I'm under the assumption that if a student tests positive, there's a protocol that's met. If the Department of Health says, hey, that whole class, again, we might only have 10 kids now. We only have half the class. Those 10 kids and that staff member, because we feel something went awry with procedure or with social distancing or with masking or whatever, our contact tracing says that these people should probably not come to school until they test negative. They could tell us that. That's one scenario of many in the decision tree. Then we would have to make the judgment call as a system. How do we move forward? I have a whole bunch of 10 kids that weren't there that day that are coming in the next cohort. The Department of Health does say, I believe, we have to close down that building, or at least an area. They will tell us which, for 3 to 5 days. Was the last information we received back in July. I think that still applies, that a building could shut down if Department of Health tells us.
So if and when the second wave hits, are you prepared to shut down again?
Yes.
And you think you've got it all? You're better prepared this time around because you've got the plan to do that.
So this is the joke that, horrible, I shouldn't say joke, but this is the humorous part about it. For hundreds of years, we've operated in an in-person model, and we're comfortable with it, right? In March, we flipped to a 100% remote, and we figured it out. And we almost, not really comfort, but we started to understand it. We started to wrap our heads around what it looked like. Operationally, the easiest thing for us to do, given the requirements of the state and the health department, is to remain 100% closed. We did that in March. We could stay closed in September, and operationally, that would be easy. As soon as you bring a person back into this building, then the operations side is nuts. The protocols, the procedures of being around other people in masses or in hallways and one-ways and signage and hand washing and masking and mask breaks and the litany of things that we're required to do. It's difficult, but educationally it's the right thing to do. So educationally, it's right to bring the kids back as much as we can. Mm-hmm. Operationally, just without thinking about our bread and butter of education, operationally, the easiest thing is to say, we're closed, because we don't have to do any of that. All those musts are out the door, because now we just have to follow the musts of the 100% remote. And we're poised very easily to do that, and to switch to that as needed moving forward. But the true headache in the business right now is bringing people back into this building and making sure they feel safe, and we are providing and doing everything we should do on our end as an employer.
Okay.
I think all employers are the same way. It's easy just to say stay out. We don't follow a bunch of health regulations if you just stay out, but educationally, that's not the right thing to do.
Okay. Do you want to add anything else about the shutdown process, the reopening process, how it's going, anything like that?
Just more globally, I think that, being this public institution and wanting to meet the needs of the public and the school and the district and our families and the community, at the same time seems to run against political and already heavily regulated industry of education and safety, and I think that's the toughest thing. That many of the tough things I struggle with is trying to meet the needs of our kids and our families, but knowing that there's this heavy regulatory side to it, and on top of that, the politics of it, whether the governor or the president, and how that has been impactful to the views of people and how we move forward and how we should not or shouldn't move forward. It starts to stray from science. And I think when I've mentioned this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it here, this is an opportunity to understand what science really is. We're not in like the law and the principle stage. We're in the tentative hypothesis. We're testing things. We don't know everything for sure right now. And as much as I struggle with how things change sometimes in our regulations, what we're required to do, what we can and can't do, I get the science of it. I have trouble when it's used as a political tool currently. And people have polarizing in this current climate of that. And so what a scientist might say, although not peer-reviewed nor official, all of a sudden becomes, oh, you have to do this, or it's mentioned in a side conversation, and all of a sudden schools are required to do X, Y, Z. Case in point, sports. Mm-hmm. Love to offer sports. I can't offer PE though. How can I offer sports and have kids on the soccer field, not social distance, slide tackling each other, elbowing, close contact without masks, but I can't have a PE class? That makes no sense. That's not a scientific. There's no science there. That's politics. That's the difficult part of the job right now. Is I just want people to step back, as I often do, and just do you understand the times we're in right now? Does anybody just step back and think pandemic in 1918 and try to get perspective and just say what was our normal? What's our new normal now? What's the normal when we exit from this? And what does science say about that? And there's no patience for that right now, and it's just a lot of politicking that affects kids. And I have a problem with that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for doing this interview.
Sure. You're welcome.